live now.
Tēnā koutou katoa, bonjour and haere mai to our distinguished guest speaker, Professor Jean Tirole, our distinguished panellists and all attendees to our public lecture. We hope that this is this inaugural lecture of a series of virtual distinguished lectures to come. I'm Susan Watson, Dean of the Business School, and my job, which I'm looking forward to doing, is to telling you a little bit about Professor Tirole. So Jean Tirole is a French professor of economics focusing on industrial organisation, game theory, banking and finance, economics and psychology. In 2014, he was awarded the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences for his analysis of market power and regulation. Professor Tirole is honorary chairman of the Foundation Gégé Lafont Toulouse School of Economics and scientific director of TSE Partnership. He's affiliated with MIT, where he was previously professor of economics and where he received his PhD in economics. He was president of the Econometric Society in 1988 and of the European Economic Association in 2001. Professor Tirole has given over 100 distinguished lectures and has published about 200 articles in economics and finance, as well as 12 books. Professor Tirole holds an honorary doctorate degrees from many universities around the world. He's foreign honorary member of the American Academy of Arts, the American Economic Association, of the United States National Academy of Sciences, of the British Academy, and several other learned societies. Amongst other prizes and honours, he received the Jules Janssen Prize of the European Economic Association in 1993, the Gold Medal of the CNRS in 2007, and was the inaugural winner of the BBFA Frontiers of Knowledge Awards in Economics, Finance and Management in 2008. He received the CME MSRI Award and the Levi Strauss Prize in 2010 and the Ross Prize in 2013. He is the laureate of the 2014 Nemes Prize in Economics and, as mentioned before, received the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences in the same year. So welcome, Professor Tirole. We're absolutely delighted that you're joining us for this inaugural economics virtual lecture. I'd now like to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Simona Fabrizi, who's going to tell you a little bit about the lecture. We're all looking forward to hearing.
Thank you so much, Susan, and good evening or morning or good afternoon, everyone. I know there are people connecting from all corners of the world, so thanks for being there. I'm also very honored to have Nobel laureate Professor Jean Tirole with us at the University of Auckland, Faculty of Business and Economics. And adding to what our Dean, Professor Susan Watson, just talked about, I would like to share with you all what it means to me to have him speak tonight to us all. Jean's work has shaped my thinking and professional development to this day. It started when I was a PhD student at the Toulouse School of Economics, and I had the privilege then to have him as a professor, but to also see him repeatedly in action, brainstorming, presenting, discussing research in a myriad of events and with many collaborators, students, and visitors. I trust that today's presentation will give you a glimpse into that intellectual journey and inspire many to pursue a career in economics and economic theory specifically. Jean is a remarkable scientist and a truly outstanding citizen. He's an incredibly eclectic and impactful theorist. He constantly advances knowledge by creating suitably elegant and novel theoretical models that beautifully distill the functioning of a variety of markets, as well as the drivers of both individual and collective behaviors. He regularly condenses that knowledge so obtained in books that then become the reference in a variety of fields, from industrial organization, game theory, procurement and regulation, corporate finance, liquidity crisis, to economics and psychology, and last but not least, to the economics for the common good. He's a true scholar, always inquisitive, curious, rigorous, but also very generous with his time and wisdom, and supportive of young researchers, helping build the next generation of conscientious economists and the next and the next. He has integrity. He is at the service of science and of the betterment of society. He believes in contributing with economics and his work to the common good and to giving it back. He has a strong sense of mission and is not self-serving. He cares about the people he works with, that he supervises and interacts with. He values the relations he builds with colleagues, students, and collaborators, also beyond work. His profound loyalty to and friendship with Jean-Jacques Lafon, his attachment to Emmanuel Fari, and his continuous support of the TSE community are a testament to his kind, caring, and humble nature as well. His collaborators, students, colleagues become friends and part of an extended scientific family that he always carries with him, even when they're gone. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you will enjoy tonight's presentation and your interactions with our guest as much as I'm sure I will. But before we get started, please allow me to briefly share some house rules while laying out the timing of today's event. During the webinar, which is now about to start, you're most welcome to submit questions using the tool available for it on this Zoom meeting. I just see that sometimes some already did that. At the end of the presentation, approximately at 8 p.m., we will have a 30 minutes Q&A session where we will open up the discussion, also based on your submitted questions with our guest speaker, Jean Tirole, but also with a few other invited panelists that you can see at the moment on the screen, and that I will introduce to you one by one at the start of that session. So without further ado, let me introduce today's webinar with Professor Jean Tirole, talking about his latest research work entitled Digital Dystopia. And Jean, thanks again for having accepted our invitation to speak at this event. And so the floor is yours, and you will have time until about 8 p.m. to complete your presentation. So thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Suzanne, and thank you, Simona, for those extremely kind words. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you today in Auckland, and I'm in Toulouse at the Toulouse School of Economics that you see in the background. I wish I were in Auckland with you, but we already have a lot of connections with you. So hopefully at some point in presence, I will be there. And it's a great honor for me to be giving this lecture. It's going to be half a lecture, half a seminar. Some of the part of it will be technical, but I hope you, if you're not in technical stuff, you'll understand what the underlying intuition is, because I strongly believe that theory is about, and economics more generally is about making this world a better place. And there's always some kind of goal in it, and try to basically get some framework to think about the common good, as Simona said. So let me try to share the screen, and hopefully I will be able to do that. Let's see. Okay, so again, it's a great honor to be giving this lecture. And let me start with a pretty broad introduction, but relatively quick one on the economics of privacy. The standard case is a case for transparency, and at least in economics. In philosophy, it's a little bit different, but in economics, people have stressed the need for accountability. So the fact that your performance is known gives you career concerns. For example, ratings have become very important on platforms, but also financial ESG ratings. If you think about what transparency internationally is doing, is of course based on accountability of governments. And later on, we'll be talking about social scoring, and social scoring is of course promoted through a need for accountability. So basically the idea there is that the transparency of behavior will actually change behavior, right? So that's basically the point. It has also another purpose, which is efficient trade. So for example, if you are worried about lending to a bank, then knowing more about its balance sheet may actually help you. Lend to the bank, it may reassure you. Actually there it's pretty ambiguous, and there's a huge literature on stress tests, which stresses this, if I can say so, this ambiguity. The fact that sometimes disclosing a stress test is a very good thing because it's going to reassure the market, but sometimes it could be a bad thing because it might trigger bank runs. So what I mean here is that transparency may not be the case, but may actually make desirable trades happen. But conversely, you could have undesirable traits. You could avoid them. So for example, if you know that your neighbor is a sexual predator, then you'll be a bit more careful with your children. And if you know that a politician is corrupt, then you might actually not vote for that politician. So, you know, that kind of thing happens. But there is also a strong case against transparency. So in favor of privacy, in favor of what's called in philosophy authenticity. And the case for that is that it's twofold in a sense. It's both on the sender side and on the receiver side. So on the sender side, the fact that transparency may actually may create too much effort. So for example, there's a case which has been made that you know, if you make the career of academics or young people in law firms too transparent, then they will work like mad because they want to get tenure, they want to be promoted to partner and so on, and they actually may work too hard instead of working too little. There's also a lot of, I'm not going to go through that, but there's a lot of undesirable behavior which is linked with too much transparency. So for example, you all know about CEOs, short-termism. So for example, the fact that CEO might want to get a good short-term performance in order to keep his or her job. At the detriment, of course, of long-term performance. It's always easy to boost a short-term performance. And of course, if you have a lot of transparency of this short-term performance, then actually that might actually distort behavior. And also that might lead to, transparency might lead to costly avoidance strategies, ad blocks, and so on. So examples of that might be the chilling effect. So there are papers arguing that people don't speak their mind if there's some correlation between the stance and socially undesirable type. So for example, I might be in favor of drug liberalization, but not dare to say so because people might say, oh, maybe he's a drug addict. And that's why he's in favor of drug liberalization. Or I may not check into a drug rehab center if I know that I don't get full confidentiality, privacy. Okay, there are papers arguing this. So transparency may have a cost on the sender behavior, but it may also have a cost on the receiver side. So something we are all worried about is the platforms know everything about us. And actually they know pretty well how much we are willing to pay for goods and services. And if that's the case, then they may allow themselves or their partners or their third-party suppliers to have access to this information, actually to extract our consumer surplus. If there is information around, then also you are going, if you know there is information around, you are going to look for it, and that may lead to excessive search and screening of partners. That may lead to ostracism and loss of insurance. So something which is well known in economics is actually that if you have too much information about the health of people, which is getting even worse, of course, with platforms, actually know everything about your health. That may actually destroy insurance. So too much information destroys insurance. The point was made by Schleifer 50 years ago. And it has been reflected in policy. So in countries where the health insurance system is private, like Germany or Switzerland or the Netherlands, there is a very strong law against what's called risk selection, because otherwise only the healthy people will get insurance and the others won't. And it's going to get even worse, of course, with genetics, where you can predict, you will be able to predict the health of people over many years. So, but its broader point is that if you have too much transparency, you may actually lose a lot of different things. So, for example, you can be made into a social pariah. Okay, you may not get access to the labor market and so on. So it can go a little bit too far. We are worried also about divisive issues. You know, in things like politics, religion, sexuality, and so on, it may, people may have different views, and that can be bad for many things. And in the extreme case, that can lead to discrimination or hatred or violence, blackmail, and so on. That's another issue with too much transparency. Another thing which is big as well is loss of second chance. So the loss of second chance occurs because the information about yourself stays on website for a long time. So that could be an issue. Almost every country, I don't know about New Zealand, but has some kind of law saying that if you commit a misdeed, you pay for it, but then once you have paid for it, then you get a clean slate, so you can start again. And you can say it's a moral thing, and actually lots of religions talk about it as well. But you could also say that it's just an incentive issue, because if you can never start with a clean slate, then you are committed to crime. You have no other possible life. So that's actually very important to realize. I see there's so much sun in my I may try to move a little bit the camera. I already moved my seat to escape the sun, but okay, anyway. What's important is the slides, of course. And finally, there is the issue of surveillance by the state, which is something that I'm going to discuss in a minute. Okay, so last thing before we start on the topic, the real topic of this lecture, is the market failure. Why does the market for privacy fail? And let me start with the privacy paradox, which is there's a disconnect between our stated preferences and our actions. And I suffer from that. So I always say I care a lot about my privacy, but when I go and visit website, which I do many, many times each day, I'm very impatient, and I click immediately and I give my consent. At least, or if it's easy actually to actually refuse, I refuse. By and large, I click and I give all the information about myself, which is not very good. Now, am I irrational? I'm not completely sure about that. The thing is that as a user, I have very limited information about the consequences of my consent. And it's very hard. I mean, there is huge transaction cost. If I were to know, I will have to get involved and pay huge transaction costs. And often, I just want to get to know what happened in the rugby game last. I mean, Toulouse is a big rugby. We have that in common with New Zealand. We are not as good as New Zealand, but Toulouse is a very important rugby town. So I want to see what happened in yesterday's game, and of course I click immediately. But if I didn't click, I would have to go through the entire basically privacy policy, which is written, of course, in a very opaque way, as you might imagine. And I will have to look at the 150 companies with, I don't even know them actually. They have acronyms, and then I have to read their policies, which I won't understand, and so on. The other thing is that I'm, like everybody, a little bit impulsive. So I want to know the outcome of the rugby game, and I don't want to spend 10 minutes reading consent policies, and I'm very impulsive. So that's one of the things. What are we worried about as well? Data breaches. Other market failures. The market for privacy fails for other reasons. So, for example, data anxiety. So even if I don't connect to websites, even if I'm not on the web, even if I don't write email and so on, still it's the case that you'll know a lot about me. Why? Because others will speak about me, about my health, about my lifestyle, about whatever. In email, they will give phone calls, which will be analyzed through AI. They will write, they will be on Facebook and so on, and they will post picture of me and so on. So in the end, even if I stay out of the web, actually there will be a lot of information about myself. So it's what's called a data extended. There have been a number of papers in the last few years written on that. I already mentioned the violation of the right to be forgotten, the fact that the material is going to stay on the web forever. And finally, there is this issue is that even if the policy is not public, is not completely transparent, there is this issue that of unraveling. So if I'm looking for a job and you know, I'm looking for a job in Auckland, and you ask me for my Facebook private account so that you see what I write on Facebook, what people write about me on Facebook, on the private accounts, and I say no, then you will say, okay, you have something to hide, there's something suspicious about it. And of course, you know, many of the novels you can read or the movies you can read about digital dystopia have something to do with, nothing to hide. You have to be transparent. And of course, that's a failure. So even if you don't share the information voluntarily, you might have to share it anyway, unless there are strong laws about this. Now, GDPR in Europe has been, the data protection regulation has been a very useful first step, but you know, I think only of it as a very small first step, because it fails to resolve those issues, and by and large. So we need to think about stronger legal frameworks. So let me move on to motivate this research I'm doing on digital dystopia. The fact is that there's been a lot of fantastic innovation, and the cost of collecting, storing, and analyzing data has become very low. The marginal cost has become very close to zero. And the question is it going to promote a more civilized society, or is that going to lead to mass surveillance by both platforms and governments holding too much information about what defines us as individuals? So we are at this junction in which a new technology, by this I mean you know, connected objects, social networks, AI, facial recognition, etc., this technology is coming to maturity, and we need what I call social science fiction. So trying to anticipate things and understand the channels through which a dystopic society might come about, and try to design some legal framework to, you know, constitutional and legal framework. Okay, so the motivation, as you might imagine, is the Chinese social credit system, which was due to be rolled over this year in China, where everybody will get an individual social score, which is going to embody a variety of criteria. In some of the pilots, over 1,000 criteria. I mean, it's a pretty involved things. And let me issue some warning, which is, I'm not going to be talking about China, because first, we don't know what the social scoring system is going to be. It's not cast in stone, and pilots may differ from the pilot. You know, the final thing is going to be differing from the pilots anyway. Okay, sorry, I've something about the video feed closer to the top right corner, so that we can see. Sorry, you cannot see the full text on the slide. So let me try to solve this issue. Okay, is that better?
We can see well, actually.
Okay, so sorry about that, and I can probably do even a little bit better. Okay, so like this. I hope it's better. Okay, so and the other thing, and there are lots of ambiguous criteria. So, for example, most of those pilots have, you lose a lot of points if you spread fake news. Now, if you look at it, who likes fake news, right? So it sounds like just the right criterion. But of course, if what is a fake news is what the government decides is a fake news, then, it's a different ballgame. So we just don't know about what's going to happen in China. And, we have to anticipate, we have to engage in social science fiction. The other thing is that at this stage, it's a Chinese specificity, but in a few years, it won't be. Now, China has specific conditions which favor that. So China is a very advanced country in terms of the technology. They've made a fantastic progress in technology, and also the political situation is conducive to the building of such a scheme. But I can bet that in a few years, many other countries will want to experiment with something similar to that. So again, we have to think through that. Now, what is this social score about? It's going to be public, by the way. Every individual will have a score, every corporation will have a score, even foreign corporation will have a score. So the idea is to elicit social sanction by peers, so it can be just simple avoidance. Simona won't be willing to talk to me because I have a bad grade or a bad reputation or something like that. That's what I would call C2C, but it can go beyond that. It can be public stigmatization, billboards with my picture on it and so on. That's a possibility. But it can be other things like, enlisting corporations. So, for example, I won't be able to get a train ticket, or in a Maldives for maybe not business class train ticket, but it could. I may not be having access to some discounts and so on. Okay. It may restrict business partners too, so that's also important. So it's going to be used for many things. Okay. So one question you may want to ask yourself is, why is that a government which can sustain such a law has to create such a social score if it wants to enforce compliance with policy? I mean, you have things like financial fines, like jail, or brute force in some cases, which could do the same. So why do you need a social score in the first place? And there are two answers to that. The first is that even for an autocratic state, it may have some advantages. So the point is that traditional repression is expensive, both because you may have inefficient and corrupt courts, they may be slow, they may be corrupt, and also if it extends beyond some small minority of citizens, there is a big cost of imprisonment and the like. And here I'm going back to an old debate between Huxley. Huxley was, as you know, the one who wrote A Brave New World, and Orwell, author of 1984. And when Orwell published his novel in 1949, Huxley wrote to him and said, "Oh, it's a wonderful book. I loved it, but it's completely irrelevant." If you read the letter, it's a little bit like this. So the idea was that, and actually, Huxley was really reasoning very much like an economist. So basically, thinking that there was, that's too expensive. In a sense, brute force is way too expensive. And you need other ways of enforcing compliance, which are cheaper. Okay. The other issue is that it may lead to international opprobrium if you put too many people in jail or if you use brute force. The second point I want to make is that the logic can also be, which I'm going to demonstrate, can be also used not only by autocratic governments, but also by entities with limited coercive power. So it could be a majority in a more democratic regime, or it could be a private platform. So it may seem surprising, but I will go through that in a minute. Okay, is everything all right in terms of face or sound or okay. So I'm going to be a little bit more technical now and talk about the modeling strategy. So the modeling strategy is going to use a very standard model. So it's a model where you have image concerns. So, you know, the standard way that there is some social pressure on you to act in a proper way. So agents will want to signal pro-social proclivity, that they are nice people and they are therefore reliable partners and the like. There will be social relationship will come in two guises, so it will be very stylized. Those will be two polar cases in a sense, extreme. So one is what I would call a strong tie, so kind of stable relationships, the ones you see in a family, hopefully, friendships, villages, and then weak ties or transient one, the ones you see on platforms, independent contracting or large city interactions. And furthermore, because transparency price is the essence of the model, the agent's behavior may become known in two ways, either through direct experience of interacting with the agent or through some social score which is going to be disclosed, okay, about aggregating the individuals, aggregate the behaviors, okay? Now, this social score, basically what it's going to do is to expand the audience. So when I behave, I can behave well or not well within the framework of TSE or my family or something like that. But then if behavior is transparent, it's going to apply and be known to a much wider audience, okay? Now the social score, I'm going to assume there is a commitment to the methodology of construction of the social score. So if you think about the recent theory, that's called information design or Bayesian persuasion. But actually the commitment is very important. Now I think it's not a bad assumption for social scoring because people learn very fast. And first the criteria are disclosed and then you know, that's something we go through many times in the day or will go through many times in the day, ourselves and our friends and our family. So actually there will be a lot of learning of this social score, okay? Okay, so the outline is that I will remind you a little bit about the model. This model has been the object of many papers in theory, and it has been tested many times experimentally in labs and the field. And then I will extend the model slightly to add a social score, and I will show you how a government, for example, can leverage social sanction by using a social score. And there are two different questions. Can it do it, and will it want to do it? And then the extension is kind of applied platform. You know, our majority in democracy use a similar technique so as to achieve the goals. Okay, so that's the thing. And then I will move on to guilt by association. So the idea that the coloring of a person's perception by the company she keeps has become very cheap. With face recognition and artificial intelligence. So now when you walk in the streets, when you give a phone call, when you meet someone in a cafe, there will be cameras, there will be recording, and artificial intelligence will very quickly draw the social graph, okay? This is new, I must say. I mean, you know, in the old time, when the Stasi was trying to do that in East Germany, I could tell you about anecdotes. Then it was a very primitive surveillance system and a very you know, labor-intensive thing and very imperfect one, whereas now it has become very cheap to draw the social graph, and that adds another dimension that can be used to force compliance. Okay, so the model is like this. So it's based on my work with Roland Benabou. as I say, on very large literature on prosocial behavior. So an individual, will call this individual I. I'm introducing an index I because later on when we talk about guilt by association, we'll of course have to introduce multiple individuals. And you have three drivers of behavior. One is intrinsic motivation, which is intrinsic motivation to do good. E will be the externality, so it's an externality if I'm being nice. So if I choose AI equals 1, then I exert a positive externality on other people, you know, whatever it is. And V is my internalization of this externality. So how much I care about others, in a sense. So V times C is my intrinsic motivation to do good. So V will be between 0 and 1. I will still put more weight on my own welfare, but you know, I may internalize someone the externality on other people. I may have a cost of doing that, you know, either in terms of time or money. And very important, and that's of course needed for social scoring and other things, is that I want to project a good image of myself. So my action is going to affect J. So it could be one person, or it could be a group of persons, multiple partners, and that will be observed by them. And I will put weight mu on the image I will project on that partner J, or that group of people J. But then I care also about other people with whom I'm not interacting today, or I'm interacting in other spheres, or I will meet tomorrow on a platform in a city, or in a shop, if it's a shopkeeper, and have image concerns new vis-a-vis those people. So just remember, this notation is that there's intensity of image concerns vis-a-vis the stable relationships, the strong ties, and new respect to the weak ties, the transient relationships. And that's this third driver of behavior is a very important thing for in that literature. So and there will be, it's very simple model. There will be either silo information, which is only people who I'm interacting with directly will observe my behavior. So J will observe the choice AI. That could be with noise, but here we're going to assume perfectly. And the future partners or the transient partners or the weak ties will observe nothing, the empty set symbol. Whereas under transparency, everybody will observe the social score. Now, the social score in this particular case is kind of trivial. It's going to be the same as the action I chose. Of course, if you have multiple actions, or if those actions are imperfectly observable, that's a little bit more interesting. But for what I'm going to do today, I just want to take the social score to be the action. So the question is my pride behavior with strong ties partner going to be disclosed to the weak ties? Okay. Now here's my UT function. So if I choose AI equals 1, then I will have my intrinsic motivation, which depends on how much I internalize my externality on you. There's a cost for me of acting in terms of money. Then there is the image vis-a-vis a strong tie. The image vis-a-vis a strong tie will be based on two things in general. So the strong ties will learn my behavior, and they will also learn, if there is transparency, my social score. Now, the social score in this particular example is the same thing as the action. So basically, for the strong ties in this particular example, the social score is not going to learn to signal anything they don't already know. The difference that the social score will make is with respect to the weak ties. So remember that the intensity of my image concern with respect to the weak ties is new. Now, under silo information, which is privacy, they won't learn anything, whereas under transparency, they will learn my action. Okay. Now, you may wonder what this VI hat is. It's the updated belief about my prosociality given the information available either to the strong tie or to the weak tie. It's not going to be the same in general. So basically, both will update their beliefs about me, and therefore I care about projecting a good image on them. So I want to have an image as high VI person. Okay. So here we are. Now, welfare, there are multiple ways in which you can write welfare. So I'm going to take the simplest form, which is that image is a positional good. I mean, to use a term in sociology, it's a constant sum. So if I buy social prestige, it's at the expense of others. Total reputation is a constant, which is actually implied by the previous UT function, where my payoff was linear in my reputation. So that means that if I buy social prestige, I steal social prestige from the others. That's a strong case, and in some cases, like in pure matching platforms, or in when I care about just about my image for non-functional purposes, that's all right. But of course, it's a pretty strong assumption. But you can take alternative expression for welfare. That's not going to change the theory. So basically here, I still have intrinsic motivation. I still have the cost. Extrinsic, that's the extrinsic motivation. But instead of image concern, I have the externality. So welfare is going to take into account the externality, but not the image. Okay. So the social optimum is basically AI should be equal to 1 if VI is greater than V. Social optimum, where basically the marginal contribution socially is equal to 0. Okay, so that's a social optimum. Now, the EQM is different because the EQM is going to depend on reputational incentive. So I care about my image vis-a-vis you. And basically, if I contribute to the social good, if I choose AI equals 1, then I will get the glory of doing that, which is M plus, which is nothing but the truncated mean. So the expectation of V, given that my type is beyond some threshold type. Because of the UT function, there is a sorting condition, and therefore those who are going to be contributing to the public good or are going to be nice are basically those who have a V which is greater than some V star, where V star is some cutoff. So if I contribute, I get the glory, which is the expected truncated mean upwards. But if I don't contribute, I get the stigma. So I get M minus, which is the other expected mean, given that V is less than V star. This delta function, which is the difference between the glory and the stigma, actually plays a role in many literature, not only the privacy literature or the pro-sociality literature. You have lots of economic situations where you have a truncation. And of course, this kind of stuff play a big role. We know a lot about it because there have been theoretical papers written on that, on the property of this function, but also empirically, because there have been tests looking at the first and second derivative of delta, actually. One case where it's going to be simple, a little bit simpler for one particular result, is the case of a social norm. So a social norm is basically strategic complementarity. If more people behave nicely, meaning that V star decreases, is it putting more pressure on me to behave nicely? And the answer is yes, if delta prime is negative. So if V star decreases, is the pressure on me to conform, to behave well, increasing? And that depends on delta prime negative. It's not needed for almost all the results, but now, what is the EQM behavior? The EQM behavior is going to be characterized by cutoff V star, such that basically the cutoff V star is indifferent between contributing and not contributing. So that's the V star's intrinsic motivation, that's the extrinsic motivation. And then this image gain delta when there is a contribution depends on whether you have privacy or transparency. So if there is privacy, I signal only to my strong ties, whereas if there is transparency, I signal not only to my strong ties, but also to my weak ties. So I have more incentive to behave. Now, whether it's a good thing or bad thing depends. You know, we all know about social science fiction. If you watch Netflix, for example, you'll see a number of cases in which actually there is over signaling. But you know, by and large, what we are going to be interested in, what all those scoring systems are about, is basically under signaling that there is not enough. The behavior is not good enough. The social behavior is not good enough. Okay, so we are going to basically assume, at least in the welfare story I'm going to give, that that there is not enough pro-social behavior. I'm looking at my phone to see what, if I'm running behind. And Simona, you let me know if I'm too slow. But I'm not going to do many computation. I'm just going to do to give you some.
Yeah, we have more than 15 minutes to go. So
okay. So I'm just going to. It's actually, I'm not going to do the technical analysis. I'm just going to give you the intuition. So far in this model, it's important to remind you of the model, but there's nothing new in what I said earlier. The new stuff starts here, which is we are going to abstract from the Orwellian state, so there's no brutality and so on. The only thing that the government is going to control is the flow of information. That's a social score. And the agent is going now to take two actions, just like before. Nothing has changed, which is AI, and the type will be VI. So there's VI is the extent of internalization as before, so nothing has changed. But now I'm going to add a pro or anti-government action. So VI equals 1 is being nice not to the other, but it's being nice to the government. So VI equals 0 is kind of dissenting or not being nice to the government, not towing the line. Let's assume there is a personal cost of towing the line, which is theta I, which is distributed according to some distribution G. Actually, it's interesting. I won't have time to do the correlation case, but actually, it's interesting also to look at the correlation case where theta I is correlated with VI. And it could go either way. You might think that people who toe the line are people who are not very nice pro-socially, but you can also tell stories which go in the opposite direction. The other point I want to make is that theta I can be positive or negative. So you can have theta I positive, which that people are natural dissenters somehow. Also, their strength of their beliefs may vary across individuals. But you may also have people who like the government, and for them theta I is negative. They like to comply. But very importantly, the agent I's image concern only on their pro-social type. So, if I think about Susan, I care about how good a person she is or how talented she is and so on, but I don't care about her political opinions or religious opinions, etc., etc. So this is a bit too strong, of course, which is that in some dimensions, of course, I might care about those dimensions as well, and for some activities, but you can also extend the theory to that if you want to. Okay, but for the moment, let's make the strong assumption that agents care only about image, about their pro-social types. So it's the same model, except that basically I'm adding to the pro-social utility here in red. BI equals 1 means that if my theta is negative, that means that I don't like to, it's positive, I'm sorry. If theta is positive, that means that I don't like to comply with the government. And if I comply with the government, I incur some disability. And the government is going to internalize social welfare, WI, which is basically, but then it's also going to care about my complying with what the government wishes me to do, politically or religiously or whatnot. So gamma equals 0 means that the government basically fully internalizes welfare, but gamma positive means that the government also wants me to comply with its objectives. So gamma infinity, for example, means that the government is totally obsessed with compliance and just doesn't care about welfare at all. So you can have the whole range of gamma from 0 to infinity. Okay. Now, one benchmark is a benchmark of unbundling. So unbundling is basically the government releases the information, is transparent but releases the information in the 2 dimensions. So I'm going to choose bi equals 1 if my theta is negative and bi equals 0 if my theta is positive. Remember, I don't have any reputational concern per se about my theta I. And that's a strong assumption, but that's, the important thing is, as I said, is that I have more reputational concern about my bi than about my theta I. And then I'm going to choose ai if and only if vi is greater than vu star. U is for unbundling, where vu star is basically given by the same equation in the case of transparency. So I care about the strong ties and also about the weak ties. Okay, so with vu star is what will happen. That will give you the pro-social contribution under unbundling. Under bundling, we're going to have a social score, which is going to, and it's actually what's going to happen in China, where you bundle stuff about various dimensions into a single score. So basically, the rating will be 1. If you behave well, if I behave well, I will get a good rating. If I behave well, and if I comply with the government's wishes. Okay, so I have to do both. And I will be blacklisted, so my rating will be 0 if if I don't behave well or if I don't comply with the government. But here you notice immediately something which is the essence of bundling, which is that the government is going to be putting some information that people are interested in. So is that person pro-social or not? But bundling it with something it wants me to do, which is BI. So it combines interesting information for other people and also information about what the person does. Now, by the way, I'm going to assume here that BI is not observed by others. It turns out it doesn't matter. It's done in the paper, it doesn't matter. You get the same result. Actually, if all the theta i's are positive, it's exactly the same series. There's absolutely no change. But but I'm going to assume that BI is not observed. And certainly what's more important is that AI is not observed by the weak ties. Now, just to simplify things, I'm going to assume that C is greater than E. What this means is that the extrinsic motivation, the cost, given that V is always less than 1, is greater than E. So that means that if you get a bad rating, you're not going to behave pro-socially. Just to shorten the analysis. Now, I'm going to look at the 2 polar cases. So in a strong tie society, I'm going to, the social score in this simple example is not going to change anything. Why? Because, if the government tells Simona that I'm a bad person, Simona knows me and she knows I'm a good person, of course. And therefore, that's not going to change her opinion, right? But those who don't know me, the weak ties, they actually say, Jean is blacklisted. Of course, it may be the case that is a dissenter, is an opponent, but it's also maybe the case that is actually not a nice person, right? And therefore, that may have some impact on my behavior. So basically, the picture is that if you have strong ties, the social score is going to have no influence in this model, but more generally not much influence. But in a weak tie society, so in a city, on a platform, and so on and so forth, it's going to have a big influence. So I'm going to show you very briefly, don't read the math, basically what's happening in, in this diagram. So my type is 2-dimensional. Here is theta, which is how much I dissent with the government, in a sense, how strongly I feel about not complying with the government's order, and V, which is my pro-social type, what fraction of my anxiety I internalize from 0 to 1. Now, under unbundling, my pro-social behavior depends only on my V. So if V is less than VU star, I'm not going to be nice. If V is greater than VU star, I'm going to be nice. And that diagram is drawn in the case of delta prime negative or 0. So basically, it's either a social norm, behaving well is a social norm, or maybe delta prime is equal to 0, which is what happens for uniform distribution. Okay, so what happens is there are two effects. The first is that pro-social behavior decreases. That's because some people will be blacklisted, especially the people who still will feel strongly about against the government. So those people, and they will be blacklisted, and therefore they have little incentive to keep signaling, because they will be on the blacklist anyway. So you will get less pro-social behavior, so you'll get a reduction in welfare. But all those people will now comply with the government, so they don't feel that strongly. They are against the government, but they don't feel that strongly. And therefore, they will actually, to keep their good social score, they will actually toe the line. And therefore, B is going to increase, because not only you will get the negative theta people, but you also get those people with relative low theta, positive but low. And therefore, you get more compliance, and therefore, there will be a threshold gamma star that the government chooses to bundle if and only if gamma is greater than gamma star. Now, let me just say that the commitment assumption is very strong. The commitment assumption is very strong because it's very important for this result. Because if there was no commitment to a social score, the government will basically retaliate against the people who choose BI equals 0, against the opponents. But then retaliation will not mean anything, because that will signal something about theta I and not something about V. So it's only because you mix useful stuff with compliance with the government's objectives that you get to get more compliance from agents. So commitment, but again, commitment might also be a repeated game. People learn very fast what's happening. So that's that I think commitment is a good assumption. It's a standard thing about information design. Strong is a commitment assumption, of course. So I'm not going to go through that. Let me just say, in terms of reinterpretation, you can basically, a government in a democracy, a majority can do the same. So, for example, if you have citizens whose lifestyle is disapproved by a majority, in principle, the majority may actually publish a social score in order to force the minority to comply. So you get exactly, it's a little bit more complicated, because of course you have, if you have social interactions between the majority and the minority, it's a different ball game. But at least if they live in ghettos, that's basically the same treatment. The other thing is that you can also apply that to platforms. So there are lots of concern about after the Facebook scandal about platform basically helping change elections. But here is a different concern, which is the platform can do the same thing. By the way, I'm not saying again, it's social science fiction. There's some bundling actually. Booking.com, for example, as I indicated in the paper, actually uses some bundling, but not of that kind. In terms of to discipline actually hotels and so on, so that they pay their fee on time, and that includes some of that in the rating they give to us. Now, something I'm concerned about is different, which is a platform is going to rate officials. So basically, of course, it's not going to be a formal rating, but you could think about those big platforms as selectively disclosing facts and pictures so as to change the image of the politician. Okay, so in practice, the platforms don't actually rate officials formally, but they rate them, informally by selectively disclosing facts. For example, the action that the politicians take in favor of their constituents, having different reactions, having different pictures. So again, if you reinterpret them all as the official eye having two actions, AI belonging to 0, 1, and of course there is image concern. So you internalize somewhat the welfare of your constituents, and you care about re-election, so you care about basically being re-elected. But then BI now becomes the attitude toward the platform. So is the official, the politician, calling for more antitrust, higher taxes, corporate taxes, more legislation on the editorial responsibility and so on? And CETA might be the cost of complying with the platform. So the theory remains the same, but now you see that the platforms can bundle useful information for the citizens with actually compliance with the platform's wishes, and basically control, especially if you have unique viewers, you can also control politicians in that way. It's not new in a sense. We all knew that before platforms, right? That's why the control of media is actually very important. But basically, this theory actually formalizes this insight. Let me just say a few words about guilt by association. So we know that coloring of a person's perception by the company she keeps is very important. It's actually a traditional policy in totalitarian regimes. Now, as I said, the marginal cost of doing that because of face recognition and AI has become almost zero. So now you can draw the social graph of most people on Earth very easily. It's a bit scary, but that means you can also use this social graph. And one thing you can add is the following thing, is that you can give a bad social score to someone, not because it's someone actually didn't behave well, but because not because if someone didn't behave well, but because if someone has a friend who didn't behave well, right? So again, if Simona is my friend and I misbehave, at least from the point of view of the government, then obviously Simona herself might get a very bad rating, might be blacklisted. And so if she writes emails to me or she's seen with me in the street, then she will get a bad thing. So now what I do there, just to tell you what happens, is that in the first stage, you choose BI. So it's just a sequential version of the previous model. Then everybody observes BI, not only the state, but also the other agents in the economy. And then they decide to match, and it takes two to tango. So basically, in order for Simona and I to exchange by email or by phone or see each other in a cafe, it must be the case that I agree and Simona agrees, right? So basically, we both have a veto power. And if Simona knows that I've dissented, I'm a dissenter, then she may decide actually not to accept this. And then, of course, then the social rating will depend on those two behaviors, but it also will depend on the social graph MI, which is a realized match list. Okay. Now, what you get is basically this: is that the new feature you get is that you may actually you might actually destroy social life, because people don't interact with each other by fear. So dissenters are completely ostracized. So basically, you have people who are going to dissent, and they will be totally ostracized by model citizens, because the model citizens are going to 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 keep their good ratings. Okay. Now you have those compliers who are a bit bizarre, who actually are not going to get a good rating, but basically they are going to comply because they don't care too much about complying, and also they want to stay friends with the model citizens. They don't want to be ostracized themselves. But the basic point is that you are going to destroy a huge amount of welfare because people won't be willing to talk to each other, meet with each other, or be seen with each other. So they will ostracize each other, but you can also use that to induce even more compliance because that's going to imply a big cost for being, from being a dissenter. Okay, so let me just conclude, and sorry, I'm behind. So social ratings have a potential to enhance trust and lead to a more harmonious society, but they may also become very dysfunctional. So we have to think about that. I'm not doing that much in this paper, but a little bit, and try to design principle-based policy frameworks. And a few hints, of course, is you want to leave aside information about divisive issues. Actually, I'm doing some more work on divisive issues in a different paper about the social graph. Here, divisive issues is what separates me from the government, possibly. You may want to be aware of exclusive or dominant design of social rating by the state, political coverage by private platforms. And even so, there are many challenging issues that you may want to think about. What happened with multitasking? So, what ways do you put? So imagine a government who is going to put more weight on jaywalking than on corruption. It will be very weird, right? What about multidimensional VI? And we don't have a VI, we are kind of multidimensional in some way. What about mistakes in ratings because of sentiments, because of discrimination, because differences in taste, because inattention or whatever? What about the heterogeneous image concerns? There's a lot of work done on that, but not in this context. I mean, Ali Benabou and others. It's clear that party members will pay more attention to the ratings than other citizens. And then should we have a social score in the first place? And I'm happy to discuss that, but I can tell you it's not something that I have an answer to, and I'm sure you will in the Q&A and the debate we are going to have. But again, thanks so much for the honor, and thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to the debate now. And I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much. So this brings us to the last part of today's event, which is, as announced, the Q&A session. So there hasn't been a lot of activity in the chat, so I think maybe now the people need to maybe let it digest, and we will probably start the conversation among ourselves, and maybe more people will pose questions on the way. But the idea was for me then to start introducing one by one quickly our panelists that have been with us since the beginning. So in particular, I'm just proceeding by alphabetical order. We have Reiko, by surname, Professor Reiko Aoki. She's a commissioner of the Japan FTC, an honorary member of the Department of Economics at the University of Auckland. And maybe if you can wave, Reiko, and your name is there so everyone can see you. Then we have Professor Stephen Galbraith with us tonight. He's the head of the Department of Mathematics, the leader of the Knowledge Sciences research team at the University of Auckland, but he's also a member of the executive board of the Cybersecurity Foundry. And so in that role, I think you will have probably interesting comments to make and to contribute to today's discussion. Then we have Greg Houston, is the founding partner of Houston Camp Consulting, which is based in Sydney. Then with us is also Richard Mead, is the in his role of Vice President of the Law and Economics Association of New Zealand, LEANZ. Having said that, Richard is also a research fellow at AUT, Auckland University of Technology, and he has also his own consulting firm, is the director of Cognitus Consulting. And last but not least, is also a TSE alumnus. So Michael Mott is a senior economist at the New Zealand Commerce Commission, our competition authority, competition branch in particular, expert in digital markets, I understand. So again, I'm sure you will have a lot to talk about. And last but not least, we have Tim Ning with us, Deputy Secretary and Chief Economist of the Treasury of New Zealand. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. And yeah, so I do see now a question popping up. So there was a little bit of warming up exercise, but perhaps one question, which is I'm going with the top of the list, which I will just read out for you, and then maybe Jean or whoever else feels like, but this is related to the work, so I suppose that's the best addressed to Jean directly, is by Eric Crampton, and he's asking, I'd expect the government range of action in the weak tie scenario to depend on the costs of developing alternative signals relative to the value of a cleaner signal of type for interacting agents, and the government's cost of suppressing those alternative signals. Could make for a fun extension. So it's more of a suggestion of possible things to look for next. Was that clear? You need me to repeat, or Jean?
No, that's perfect. No, this is a beautiful extension, and maybe Eric can do it, because no, but it's true. I mean, this is we will expect all those activities to be endogenous, and there's hiding, there's concealing. And conversely, you're going to move to other activities you will not perform otherwise. So this is all an open topic. So, I'm talking about social science fiction, but, I also talk about the need for us actually to think more deeply. So I think of this paper as just a first step in opening a Pandora box somehow. And, this is a good example of things to do, having the government actually suppressing alternative signals, and people moving to different kinds of signals, and some of them will be made public in some way. But something that comes out of the research is that the government will want to have some kind of monopoly position on those. Government doesn't want the private sector to create its own social scores, because if that's the case, that means that people will look at the social score created by the private sector, knowing that the government is creating a social score which embodies things they don't care about. So the bundling creates some garbling, and therefore, there is this whole arms race between the private sector and the public sector. And of course, in an autocratic regime, it will be easier for the government actually to control things and make sure that its score is the one score which is going to be used by everyone. A bit scary, but that's
yeah. Thank you. There's another question that now popped out first because people are liking it more, and is the following. Are strategic ratings factored into the modeling, for example, that is politically or ideologically motivated ratings, perhaps with the intent to benefit the rater or to maliciously disadvantage the person being rated?
Well, that's another of the extensions I mentioned at the end, which is, I mean, there is by the way, I assume the government basically just put the input in there. The whole thing is about the algorithm. There is a commitment on the algorithm, and that's what is being manipulated, but not the actual information. The actual information, the input comes in and it goes into the score. Of course, you have another dimension, which will be manipulation, but that might actually reduce the credibility of the score. So it's not clear the government actually wants that. The government wants to commit to information design. Now, you could have also the issue of manipulation by, say, the weak ties, for example. And that happens, and we know, so for example, you might, on platform, you already see that you might give a rating, a bad rating to someone who, on Uber, who is driving pretty well and is nice, but you don't like because you don't, of discrimination or something like that, prejudice. So that's clearly now. Something I must say I found surprising, probably you too, is that I've been surprised for a long time by how accurate the ratings are, in a sense, because there are all kinds of incentives, for a restaurant or driver. No, driver, it's different. It's somebody else who's going to do the rating. But restaurant, you just ask your friends and you destroy the next door restaurant and
Yeah.
so on. And actually, it's more accurate than I would have thought. Of course, there is some monitoring going on in those platforms, but yeah.
Yeah. Kind of related, suppose. I'd wonder if people would systematically discount whatever the government's social scoring results were, because everyone knows that they're gaming it, and would rely more on genuine ratings like those you see on, for instance, eBay or other platforms.
Okay, so that's an interesting question. I don't think that people will dismiss that. I mean, actually, if you look at the pilots in China, for the moment, the social score are not public, and yet they are disclosed. So it's basically the unraveling theorem in operation somehow. So, you know, if I have a good rating, by the way, I have a good rating, so I'm going to show it to you. And yeah, so people show when they have a good rating and social score in those pilots, and if they don't, of course, that they don't show it, but you know that means they have a low social score. So
yeah,
so that's I think, given that there's some useful information in the score, and again that's a theme, is that those scores are manipulated by the government. But the basic idea behind those scores is that there is some useful information in there. It's welfare decreasing, but you know there's some useful information in there, so it's going to be used. The second answer is that sometimes it's going to be mandatory. So something I haven't had time to discuss is that it's going to be used actually for some traits which will be undoable. So for example, as I said, you know, if I'm a political opponent, I may not be able to take the plane. And the airline company is going to ask me for my score. And if the airline company still sells me a plane ticket, then the airline company will have a bad score, which means that other businesses won't be able to do business with it, and so on. So part of it is not going just to be some spontaneous action by the citizens and the shops and so on. It's also going to be imposed by the government through, you know, the people with a score below that, you're not allowed to serve them, especially in those areas where there cannot be any arbitrage. So, you know, again, if I have a bad score and I want to buy a TV, I could ask someone with a good score to buy the TV for me. That's not a crime. But if I want a visa or if I want to take a plane, that's a different ballgame.
Yeah. We have also very long questions, but I will shorten it because otherwise we won't have time to go through. But in a nutshell, it's coming from a PhD student, one of ours within the business school in accounting in particular. And the person says, I'm fascinated to see all the range of things you can do. And clearly this is, you know, perhaps not something that each of us, and including themselves, can repeat. So the question would be, should we pay more attention to one particular area and dig in more in depth, or should we look for inspiration in various fields and try to explore the knowledge broader? So it's kind of more of an advice for young PhD student thinking, you know, clearly not everyone can be so talented. So what should we concentrate on the most? Well, difficult to answer, I suppose. But
that's important. Let me tell you about being talented first. When I received the Nobel Prize, my mother was still alive. She's 96, and she was interviewed by on TV, and you know, the journalist said, you know, your son is a genius, and she said, not at all. He's not a genius. I mean, he's just someone who is passionate about his work, and he has worked hard, but you know, he's no genius in the profession. So first, forget about this. Everybody is able to actually do great research, but that requires hard work and that requires motivation. And you know, it's not only true for research. I would say this is true for any profession. If you love it, if you are motivated by it, and you work hard, and you know, you see everything in those lights. So take this paper, and you know, I could give many other examples of papers I've written. You know, you read the newspaper, you go to China, you do this, you do that. Immediately that makes you think, do we understand those things? And the answer is no. I mean, sometimes we don't understand. Sometimes, yes, sometimes economics is incredibly useful and we can apply. We have a framework, we have a deciphering key to understand things, but sometimes, we don't have that much to say. And, some of my best paper, I don't know if they are good, but some of my best papers came from, I was talking to someone in government or in a firm or colleagues, and people saying, "Oh, you must have the answer to that." And I look at them and I said, well, I have no answer to that. I mean, just like I just don't know. And, which is bad, but at the same time gives you opportunity for research. So, my view is that passion is actually very important in this profession. And this is really something that that is incredibly important, and good colleagues, and you have very good colleagues in Auckland. Good colleagues are very important. Good fellow students, professors. It's incredibly important. And actually, that's one of the causes of the lockdown, by the way. Something I found is that I found it was very easy during the lockdown to finish papers and things like that. But starting new papers, I need to interact, I need to discuss, and and things like that. And it's, there's something, and for students and young faculty, it's an issue, I think. So I hope this period is going to be over soon, honestly.
Thanks. I think we should probably bring the conversation back to the panel for now. There are more questions coming up, but I think I would like to, I'm sure you have questions of your own that you would like to ask. So if anyone has a question, just raise your hand, unmute yourself. So Richard, there's several of you. So Richard, you raise your hand first. I think Stephen next, then Greg, and then Reiko in that order. But please, Richard, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. And so it's great, Jean, to be able to hear from you from the other side of the world. So thank you so much. And we hope to hear from you again. But
in person, hopefully.
Yeah, indeed. That'll be even better.
Yeah.
Here's a question that's perhaps more in the nature of a speculation about an extension. In your model, where we're taking the government's preferences as given, I'm wondering, in democratic societies, can we fool ourselves somehow that if we have the right permutation of social ties or aversion to towing the line, that somehow through the voting process we can protect ourselves against autocracy, if you like? Is it possible to give some hints at which direction you think this goes in?
Well, I mean, this is a much broader topic, of course, and the recent evolution in the US, in Russia, in China, in Brazil, in Turkey, and so on. I mean, it doesn't make us optimistic, right, about this, but who knows? The thing is that, it has a connection to what I'm talking about. Again, it's social science fiction, but we also that the modern technology will help us actually get better governance, because that empowers the people to demonstrate, gather, exchange information when the media are controlled by the government or by business. So we also that this will be a good thing, but it's not clear, because if you think about facial recognition and AI reading blogs, emails, and other things, it's going to be very, very difficult to exchange hostile information, to organize demonstration and the like in the future. So what I'm concerned about is some possible ratchet effect, where you have a society which turns less democratic, and then it becomes hard. But of course, then that means that mostly revolution will occur within the power, within the government, as opposed to from outside. And it's possible. We have seen that, and we have seen, I mean, take China, I mean, the fantastic evolution that has taken place, after 1980 and up to recently. But a slow liberalization of things. But who knows? I mean, this is going to be the whole power thing. And don't forget that it may happen in a democratic regime. If you have a democracy in favor against some minority, well, you can have the same kind of phenomenon happening, right? So The difference maybe is that the private sector might have a bigger say in the democracy, and the courts might actually be more careful about the social scores. At the same time, we also see the courts being eroded in some countries, including in Europe. So who knows?
Yeah.
I can imagine COVID vaccination status could become a thing where even democracies very soon, we might be very worried about this, and it might be very public.
Yep.
Yes.
I'll move to Stephen, I think, in the order of who raised hands. So then Greg, then Rico, then Tim.
Thank you very much, Jean, for your talk. And actually, my question has already been led into from some of the discussion just there. I mean, you framed it as a kind of dichotomy between a civilized society and surveillance. And the world we're in now with the COVID virus is applying some tension here, because we have, certainly in New Zealand, a situation where some people are using apps to keep track of their movements, which is a good thing for the well-being of society. And then other people are saying, well, this seems okay now, but if they start adding more functionality to the app, this could now become something which is monitoring us. And I think my question, I suppose, is around this kind of mission creep, where people may opt into something because of the benefits. And then over time, this information gets used for different purposes. And I guess the question, I suppose, is which point does the dystopia start? Can your model help us understand where the line crosses to dystopia?
Stephen, it's a very good question. I really don't have an answer. It's actually a very important one, because we know that to fight COVID, we have to be somewhat intrusive in terms of privacy. And actually, we have to be even more intrusive than we are now, which is that, you know, for the moment, in most countries, those tracing apps are actually optional. And actually in France, nobody is using them anyway. And you know, if you really want to use them properly, you also have to be more intrusive. So if so for example, if your doctor finds or test finds that you have COVID, then also that must have an implication for your quarantine and so on and so forth. I mean, you need, and you have also a solution that tracing app, which, you know, combining them with tracing, like for example, having tests, and you know, you have a green light or red light or yellow light on your phone, depending on all those will be very good to fight COVID. But the question is exactly the one you ask, which is mission creep. How far do we go? And it will depend on two things. The first is whether we can actually delete the information very quickly afterwards. And that requires very strong courts, so that they make sure that the information is kept only for 2 weeks or something, and then it's deleted. The other thing is whether you could have a social stigma. I'm in my TSE building, but then the TSE, which is the case, and I have to get into a TSE building, I have to show that on my phone, I have this green light, right? I have the green light on my phone. To enter, that means I've been tested in the last week or so, and I'm negative on COVID, okay? Which sounds like a very reasonable policy, right? So that I'm not going to contaminate my colleagues and students and the staff. So that sounds very reasonable. But now, if COVID were kind of illness that will be kind of frowned upon, and I hope not, but you know, it might still signal promiscuity. It might be signal that I'm not careful, or, and you know, I'm extrapolating here a lot, but you know, it might actually be the case, and then that at TSE people start looking at me in a weird way, because they know that I've had COVID or something, even so I'm asymptomatic. I don't know. I mean, all those things. That brings me to my last point, which is a way not to answer your question, which is basically that this crisis was perfectly, could have been anticipated. No, there are lots of pathogens, and there will be more and more. anti-bioresistance and permafrost and other pathogens. And we knew that in some way. And I, like many other people, most people actually never anticipate that. Now, since February, we have had thousands of papers on COVID. But where were the papers before February, which would have enabled us to start planning on all those things? I mean, the policy has been okay, you know, but I think we could have done much better if we had had a framework with strong court surveillance of you know, respecting privacy and so on. And we were not there. So that's my point in it. It's a bit of a moralistic thing, is that we must anticipate more, and we don't always do that.
Very well. Greg, you had the question?
Thank you. My question is in a sort of similar vein, but different. And I think it's a sort of an underpinning of this whole model and framework, that there's sort of monopoly issuance of social ratings. So there's a sort of authoritarian foundation for the model. But what if we, as we've been discussing, we don't have that monopoly, but there's competition for social platforms, non-government platforms as well as perhaps government platforms, and so that has two potential sort of angles, I think, from the things you're raising. One is that is there a tendency for that for one platform or to dominate? Because we know that competition for platforms is complex and episodic and so on. So is there potential for that to drift towards the dystopian state, or to save us from the dystopian state? So, or more generally, how do you think competition for platforms and the social ratings within platforms might alter your findings and thinking?
Well, Greg, that's going to depend on who has access to the information somehow, to the data. Because if you want to publish a social rating which expunges the information about B in my model, you can do that, but you must have the information about, you know, for example, behavior. So if I misbehave in the street, for example, I make some racist comment in the street, for example, or I degrade some stuff in the street, I destroy something, or I pollute or something like that. Who is going to get the information? Basically, the government through cameras, you know, through video or recording of what's happening in the street. So access to data is also going to control access ratings, right? To the design of ratings, right?
Which is where the monopoly comes in. Yeah.
That's where the monopoly comes in. And on top of that, the government can have access to more data, because government can actually collect the data from all the platforms. And in that case, it gets all the data possible. So it gets a more accurate picture, even on the AI front. It gets a better picture of what people, how people behave. So yes, so there's a natural tendency, natural dominance of the government rating. But, you know, still the private sector can undo some of that.
There's some hope. Reiko, you had a question? Reiko, yeah.
I actually had two questions, and I couldn't make up on which to ask. But since Greg brought up this question about monopoly, I'll ask the one I thought about, antitrust. And I know this paper is not antitrust, but you do mention, and you mentioned your talk about Booking.com and their ratings. And one of the challenges now in antitrust, as you know, and everybody knows, is how to handle data in mergers. And more data can mean different things depending on what the two data are. It could just be more data by duplication, or they could be some kind of complementary data that would really raise the value. And in your framework, you do mention about complementarity of ratings social ratings and the behavioral compliance, I think. And it matters, the results do depend on whether it's substitutes or complements. And I was wondering if you had thought about extending this framework to answer merger issues where data is involved.
Well, Rico, I haven't studied that. And your point is important. I mean, we know that, and you know this issue better than I do, but we know that this issue is important to consider data barriers to entry. So if you want to think about data barriers to entry, you have to think about whether they are increasing or decreasing return to scale or complementarity or subsidiarity. So there is a part of the literature in economics talks about the law of large numbers. So basically, if I know if I have data on 100 cars moving along from A to B, then my GPS positioning system trying to predict the best route will have basically the information I need. I don't need 100,000 cars to predict that. So you have a kind of decreasing return to scale, and then you can have some competition happening. Whereas there is another route which says, well, okay, that's fine, but for small searches, for example, you cannot compete, and that's in part the reason why Bing, for example, has trouble competing with Google, is that it's probably as good as Google on frequent searches, but for less frequent searches, there are many missing data, and on top of that, there is data about the website, but there's also data about you, which also tries to predict what you're going to like and so on. So, and then you have this issue of complementarity. So often you want to combine data sets in order to get better predictions, which there's a fair amount of complementarity. And then there's the issue of privacy, because of course, if you combine more data sets, then it's going to be easier to de-anonymize, those data, even if they have been anonymized in the first place, you can figure out who the people are, basically, if you have many data sets which are combined. So there are two questions. One is on privacy, and one is on antitrust, basically, and on mergers. And that's something, I think the jury is still out. I mean, we need to think more about when it's a case. And then there is the issue of mobility and portability, which is important. For example, for social networks, the ability of being cheaply able to take one's information and pictures and so on very easily from one platform to another is very important also. So all kinds of things, but I think the devil is in the details. So I will need to look at each instance to really have an opinion.
I hope you do together. Thank you.
Thank you, Rika. Tim, you had a question. You raised your hand before, and then I'm coming to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Simona, and thanks very much,
I think you're muted. Can you guys hear Tim? Try again.
I should be on. I should be off.
You're fine. You're fine now. Yes.
Thanks, Simona, and thanks very much, Sean, for a really interesting talk on what's obviously an extremely important and topical subject. So I think for liberal democracies, one of the concern that's in a way most sort of salient in your paper is the one about majorities tending towards, if you have an autocratically inclined majority, they may want to impose things on a minority. And then the other one is about platforms influencing politics. So my question is, for the latter case, presumably citizens hopefully have an interest in knowing the truth about their politicians and the truth about, how liberal their politicians are. Basically, we want to have politicians that respect human rights and so on as a way of guarding against the sorts of dynamics you illustrate in the models. So my question is, when you look around the innovation and platforms that we see empirically, how optimistic are you that we will have this kind of growth of the fake news registers and the people that rate politicians in terms of how often they lie and things like that? Is it sufficient to overcome the the sort of social network benefits that people get from less reputable platforms, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, well, maybe I return the question and ask you, Tim, what you think, what's your opinion? It's something I haven't worked on, but clearly we know that having more information doesn't always help, right? Partly because of psychology, that we want to go to websites which confirm and fit with our opinion as opposed to knowing the truth. And there's a lot of evidence in psychology and economics about exactly that, is that we prefer to have the bias media outlets and than knowing the truth if this truth is actually going against our own opinion. And the segmentation of the market there is very important. In the old past, in the good old time, the French readers will read 2 or 3 newspapers like Le Monde and Le Figaro, and they will listen to the one TV station, which was of course a government TV station, which was terrible. But at least you didn't get all those crazy crazy views expressed on websites and blogs. So that really requires people wanting to know the truth, and that's really the other thing is about democracy is that you might have a situation. It's like for law enforcement, you might have actually citizens who actually say, "Oh, it's not a good thing, but we need that." So actually, there is no reliable pool in China, but I'm willing to bet that actually the scoring system at this stage is popular in China, partly because it reduces some incivilities. So people drive more carefully in cities where actually there are cameras and video recording and things like that. So there are actually benefits to this, and the cost hasn't been observed yet. so those things might be popular. It's the same thing, as I said, with law and police enforcement, which is we need some of that. And the question, and I think that was Stephen's question, if I remember well, the question is where do you draw the line? At some point it may actually, it's a slippery slope, and at some point it might actually backfire because the government is abusing its powers. But let me ask you the question. What's your feeling about that? Michel won't be able to speak.
What's my feeling about it? Well, I mean, you're right that it seems there is something. The platforms are revealing that there is something deeply tribal about most human beings, and so I would hope that those of us that are interested in pluralism and deliberation in government and so on would find ways to encourage the competitive pressure that you point out in the model is so important to achieving good equilibria, a sort of information-rich equilibria rather than the government trying to manipulate us. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it yet. I like the fact that there are people out there with creating fact-checking websites and so on. It's not, I suppose it's not clear to me how the government can support that through regulation or whatever, but it's just about competitive pressure,
No, but as you said, and actually, if you look at the fact-checking stuff existed in 2016. So Hillary Clinton at that website, but who went to that website? Not the Trump voters. And I asked myself a question when, in France in 2017, the populists were about to win. I don't like to sign letters, but I organized one, which I talk about in Economics for the Common Good, which I use Nobel Prize laureates to, almost all of them said yes, actually, including people like Amartya Sen, who, like me, never signed letters. because I was so scared. I mean, everybody was scared after Brexit and after Trump. France will become a populist country as well. It was pretty close, I must say, not the second round, but 2 weeks before the first round. But the interesting part is, where do you send this letter? So I debated at TSE, where do I send this letter? And obviously the people we wanted to reach were not the readers of Le Monde. They were people who will vote for those populist people. And by the way, we didn't enter politics in that letter. We just stayed on the economics of the issue, right? We didn't want to enter the politics because that was, as economists, that was not our role, I think. We have political opinions as well, of course, but our role was to stay on the economics front. But in the end, we chose to send it to Le Monde, which is kind of elite newspaper in France. And actually that was useful because then Marine Le Pen the same evening was questioned by journalists on primetime TV and so on. But, was it the right way to go? I don't know. I mean, the best thing will have to be probably to go to a blog written by, by supporters of those things. I tried to convince them. It was not the readers of Le Monde who were to be convinced. And that's part of the difficulties we face in getting the message across. We economists, because we listen to lots of bad ideas, as we know, and we need to actually interfere. But again, and first one, when I write in op-eds, I tend to write op-eds in newspapers which are mainstream newspapers and so on. Actually, I admire people. Some of my MIT colleagues go and speak in extreme right-wing shows, and I think I admire them. I mean, they get killed, as you might imagine. They get destroyed, but I think that in a sense it's a great thing to do because at least you reach some people and you say no, it's a little bit more complicated than you think. Rather than writing for the elite in the New York Times, all right?
Very well. I think, Michel, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for a fascinating presentation. When reading the article, I thought about New Zealand and whether it would be likely that New Zealanders would want to spontaneously adopt a social credit system of this type, and I thought that the appetite for something like this might be limited, partly because New Zealand doesn't face the same challenges as people in China do. So it's small population, relatively high level of social trust. Plus, there are some democratic checks. But I was wondering whether dystopia could be exported. And you mentioned in the article that the social credit system could be expanded to B2B channels and potentially also cover foreign companies. And I was wondering whether you see it as a risk that through the trading channel, a system like this can spill over and propagate onto trading partners, and the other countries can indirectly be drawn into the orbit.
There's a direct effect, which is obvious. So the businesses and the people who deal with a country with a social credit system are going to change their behavior because they want to trade. And that's kind of obvious. And it's a broader issue with extraterritoriality, which is important. And by the way, you don't need a social credit system for that. A scoring system also, social scoring system is very efficient. But in Europe, we suffer from the sanctions that the US impose on European firms if the foreign policy of Europe doesn't correspond to the foreign policy of the US. And that's a question of extraterritoriality, and that's a big issue, right? Now, I think your question was a little bit different. Maybe you can elaborate on this, but the fact that your social scoring system in one country might lead other countries to adopt a social credit system. So maybe you can elaborate on this?
Yeah, I think it was more along these lines. I thought that it would be unlikely that New Zealand would, or New Zealanders would spontaneously adopt something similar. But obviously there are big trading partners. China's a large trading partner, and I was wondering to which extent that could have spillover effects.
Yeah, but I mean, if China wanted to get information about people who have some connection, they might be citizens, they might be foreign trading partners with China, they can ask for data or try or spy. The US also does that, of course, and everybody does it in some way, but try to get information by spying on data or requesting data. That's possible. That's possible. But it's different from adopting a social credit system. It's basically complying, helping the other country to have a better social scoring system. But it's not for that reason that New Zealand will adopt its own social scoring system, right? It's a different. I mean, you can comply with data sharing, but not having your own social scoring system at home.
All right. Well, I have the impression that we could be here for much longer, and I mean, I'm also aware of the time, especially, we did not necessarily, you probably have other commitments, John, and the others as well. Those of you who are here, it's late at night for some of us.
It's pretty late for you.
But I mean, I would be staying for, for hours, so as far as I'm concerned. So I suppose if there is one very last pressing questions, maybe firing question, very an urgent one, or comments anyone would like to add at this point?
Maybe a super quick one, Jean. When you in the beginning of your presentation, you said that the GDPR was a good start in some direction. I'm wondering what type of regulation would help us with these rating with these scorings on platforms. How much can property rights on information solve? Where I have the right to my information, or to decide what my information is used for.
Well, again, we need to do more research, and I hope you are going to do some research, Stephen and others. I've started doing a little bit of work with Patrick Ray, you know well, on trying to think about improvement to GDPR, but let's say it's too early to really have anything very clear to say. But let me just say that I think we need more regulation. I mean, that may surprise people, but I think we need more regulation, and that's just by introspection. My own experience on the web is not that good since GDPR hasn't improved really since GDPR has been around. I still behave exactly the same thing. I'm still totally unsure about what would be done with my data and my contacts and preferences and so on. So I'm kind of frustrated by what's going on. I applaud GDPR because I think at least that's an impetus. You have a group of people in Europe basically saying we have to tackle those issues and actually do something about it. So GDPR is important. Don't misunderstand me, but at the same time, I just don't see that as being the final say on the topic. We need to have more thinking about it. And whenever I click on a website, I would like my preferences to be on my computer, so that it automatically. And of course, you can be flexible about this, but basically try to have things which are going to protect me against things I don't want to do. But of course, I realize that may also imply that that I have to pay for some services. It's not free. We get all those wonderful services on the web because the platforms get very rich with the data, and they will become richer with new applications to health and other things, and mobility. But you know, in the end, then that will be a test of whether I'm actually so worried about my privacy or not. But at least I would like to know what I'm doing and choose between paying and not paying. And I think that would be a huge improvement.
Very well. I think at this point, on this vote, we need to do more research like that in a way, because it never ends, right? You're given a lot of things to think about, I'm sure. And so thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And thank you so much again to you, Jean, for accepting our invitation. We really hope to have you here in person as well sometime soon. I know it will be during our summer, your winter. I know your preference in when travel will be possible to be resumed. And we don't really know when that is, but we all hope it's going to be very soon. So thank you so much, really. And thanks everyone that was connected and is still with us now. And you can unmute yourself and upload. And yeah, it was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
And thank you so much to all the panelists, really, and for your insightful comments and questions as well. So thank you everyone.
Thank you also
they were
to
great questions, and thanks so much for inviting me, for the honor.
No, that's our pleasure, really. Stefan, sorry, you were saying something?
Oh, sorry. I was just saying thank you also to all of the attendees.
Yes, as I said, everyone that was attending, some of us might have not stayed until the very end of this conversation, but we will have a recording as well. And so this will be made available. And so those that couldn't stay until the very end, I'm sure they will have an opportunity to catch up this way. And thank you again so much for your time and for the insights. Yeah,
thank you, Jean. Thank you,
everyone. Thank you, everyone, really.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye. Have a good day. Still morning for you. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Simona.
Thank you, Reiko.
Thank